A brisk November evening had fallen upon the city when I arrived at the time traveller's house. The fog of London lay thick and golden in the lamplight, swirling between the gas lamps and obscuring the outlines of the great baronial windows through which I peered. Inside, the drawing-room glowed with 100 candles, their reflected brilliance dancing upon the high mantelpiece and shadowing into corners where leather-bound volumes and scientific apparatus lay in quiet repose. 6 of us sat about the semicircular table. Philby, with his shock of red hair and perpetual argument; the psychologist, placid-faced and contemplative; the medical man, whose keen eyes missed nothing; the provincial mayor, lumbering with curiosity; a shy, reserved gentleman known to us only as Blank; and I, the narrator, entrusted to record what followed. In the centre of that familiar salon stood a metal framework scarcely larger than a clock, the model of a machine that promised, beyond all conjecture, to shatter our understanding of reality. The time traveller, tall and eager, paced the length of the room, his forefinger marking invisible lines in the air. He paused, cheeks flushed, eyes alight with discovery. "Gentlemen," he began, "you must follow me closely. I shall have to controvert certain ideas universally accepted, chiefly that time is not a dimension of space. Imagine, if you will, that a line of thickness nil has no real existence, no more than a mathematical plane. Yet we admit these abstractions as we must admit time if we would grasp the 4th dimension." A murmur rippled round the circle. Philby's brows knitted, the psychologist nodded, the mayor sighed. The time traveller walked to the model. Under the soft phosphorescence of an oil lamp, the brass and ivory framework seemed to tremble with promise. "Observe this bar," he said, touching a slender crystalline rod. "When I have completed the larger machine, this lever will send it, and any traveller upon it, into the futura, the past according to his will." He seated himself, drew a breath, and placed a hand upon the white lever. All of us leaned forward, our glasses forgotten, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Then, with a swift motion, he engaged the mechanism. There was a breath of wind, the flame on the lamp flared, and the little framework shivered. Before our astonished eyes, it blurred into an evanescent ghost of glimmering brass and ivory and vanished. Silence followed. The table remained clear. The model had gone. Philby, in a voice half laughter, half despair, whispered, "By Jove, he's done it." A pale tide of excitement swept through the company. Yet in each of us, I felt, was a different reaction. The medical man's bewilderment, the psychologist's guarded fascination, the mayor's anxious doubt, Blank's silent awe. Above all, Minnie-Anne acute curiosity tempered with the dread of witnessing the impossible. Thus, in the glow of that late Victorian drawing-room, our feet still planted upon the carpets of convention, we glimpsed through a hair's breadth the deeper month of time. And that glimpse would lead us, in turn, to behold the fate of humanity itself far beyond any we had dared to imagine. Chapter 1. The 4th Dimension. The evening following our first demonstration dawned a quieter affair. After the brief excitement of the vanished model, the time traveller had repaired to his private laboratory to assemble the larger machine. Yet even in his absence, a palpable tension lingered in the air of that drawing-room. Philby, with habitual restlessness, paced before the fire. The psychologist sat lost in thought. The medical man ran a hand through his hair as though seeking an answer in the shifting shadows. "Do you truly believe him?" Philby asked abruptly, voice echoing off the panelled walls. "No," the psychologist admitted. Yet something in his manner compels reconsideration. The mayor fidgeted in his chair, but surely, he broke off with a sigh. If time is indeed a 4th dimension, why do we not perceive it as such? At that moment the time traveller reappeared at the threshold, dusting his hands on a soiled cloth. He wore an expression of triumph tempered by fatigue. "It is true," he began, "and tonight I shall prove it to you. Permit me to outline the theory without further delay. You know the 3 dimensions of space length, breadth, height definable at right angles. Yet the mathematicians themselves admit that these are mere abstractions. What exists in nature, I contend, is extension in 4 directions, the 3 planes of space and the plane of time. He halted before the semicircle of chairs and pointed to the elaborate sketches spread upon a small table. Inked diagrams traced lines through a tangle of axes, each arrow labeled with symbols of duration as plainly as those of length or thickness. Consider a geometric point, he said. It has 0 dimensions, and by its nature can never exist in the physical world. Scale that abstraction upward. A line of thickness nil, a plane of no breadth both fall outside reality. Yet our consciousness moves persistently along that imaginary axis we call time. Man lives from cradle to grave, not in any one of the 3 familiar dimensions, but in this 4th. A hush fell, broken only by the crackling logs and the low hum of the gas jets above the windows. We looked at one another, unsteady in that moment, as if the walls themselves had shifted. "Surely you do not ask us to discard all that Euclid taught us?" Philby demanded, tone-edged with impatience. "No logic can render the invisible visible." The time traveler's eyes glinted. "Do not discard, but extend. Euclid's geometry is not erroneous, but incomplete. By acknowledging time as a spatial axis, many paradoxes resolve themselves. For example, gravity limits our vertical movement, yet the 3rd dimension exists. Why, then, should another dimension be forever beyond our reach? What if we could master it as we have mastered height and width?" A brief murmur of astonishment rose, then faded, as the magnitude of his claim settled upon us. "Enough theory," he said, stepping back. "Let us turn to practice." At a signal, a servant brought forward the larger modular complex assembly of brass girders, quartz rods, filigreed levers, and etched dials. It glimmered under the lamps like an intricate cityscape in miniature. "Observe," the time traveler instructed, "that ivory lever. Press it, and the machine will glide, imperceptibly at first, into the future. Reverse it, and you should return whence you came." He fastened a leather strap around his waist, looped his foot into a small stirrup, and steadied himself at the seat. "Behold," he said simply, and reaching forward, pressed the lever home. A faint breeze rustled the papers on the table. The flame of the lamp quivered. Our hearts clenched. Then, where the gears had been, there was only empty air. We blinked, breath caught in our throats. The time traveler was gone. Silence, heavy and complete. The fire crackled on. "Bye," the medical man began, jaw slack with wonder, but the psychologist raised a hand. "Wait," he said quietly. "We must examinists seek signs of trickery." We poured through every angle of that deserted mechanism, from its carved handles to the engraved plate at its base, yet found no sign of deception. Kneeling, the mayor traced the faint impressions of a leather strap upon the floor, evidence that a body had indeed occupied the saddle. Above us, hidden beyond the ornate curtains, the London fog pressed against the window panes, oblivious to the rupture in time within those walls. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Future. I recall stepping gingerly across the threshold of the laboratory, heart thrumming with trepidation. The hour was late, and the lamp's glow seemed dimmer than before, as though the very ether of the room had grown less substantial. Philby, the psychologist, the mayor, all of them were gathered once more around the hearth, silent in anticipation. The time traveler re-entered, the mantle of night upon his shoulders, and an odd light in his eye. His coat was ragged, its linen stained with dust, and a greenish flake that crumbled beneath my curious fingertips. His hair, once as meticulously combed as his evening dress, now hung in tangles. His face, usually so composed, was drawn and haggard. "I apologize for my appearance," he murmured, voice low and uneven. "I have returned from the future, a world quite beyond anything you have yet imagined." He paused, lifting a hand to brush the arc of sweat from his brow. The firelight flickered against the window panes, and for a moment none dared speak. At last the medical man broke the hush. "You have come back safely then. But how? Where have you been?" His tone married relief with scientific hunger. The time traveler drew a breath and began. "It is a long tale," he said, "and I pray you have patience. But first, let me show you what I have gathered. These samples will attest that my journey was not dream nor delusion." He reached into the depths of his coat and produced a handful of withered blossoms, strange and milky-petaled, their stalks cased in a faint crystalline dust. They seemed to shimmer under the lamplight, as though each held a trace of distant suns. The psychologist leaned forward to inspect them, careful as one might examine a rare specimen. "They bear no likeness to any flora of our age," he observed softly. "From what land do they hail?" The time traveler's lip trembled with an almost imperceptible tremor. "From lands beyond any chart future, lands in which vegetation has evolved without human care or society. You shall hear soon enough. But those flowers are merely a foretaste of what this new world held." He moved toward the hearth, seating himself with slow deliberation. His footing faltered, and Philby began to rise. But the time traveler waved him back. "Let me collect myself, then I will speak. But mark my if I should faint, or if this narrative should strain your credulity, attend to these flowers. They are from the soil of an age yet to come." So we settled, each man drawn taut with curiosity, about the lamplit room. The distant murmur of the city seemed suddenly remote and insignificant. The time traveler closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and spoke in a quieter, steadier voice. "I awoke upon a gentle slope of turf, beneath a sky of deep, tranquil blues unlike any dawn I have known. The machinery of my small model had carried me perhaps 800,000 years thence. No sooner had I sat up than I found myself surrounded by beings of delicate frame, clad in silken garments of pale colors. Their bodies were small, little more than children's stature, but their heads bore the marks of maturity. I named them Eloi, for they embodied an idle elegance that bespoke long repose under a benign sun." He paused, lost for an instant in the memory. Their world, oh, how can I convey its innocent beauty? Ruined cities of white stone lay half-buried among rose tendrils and silver grasses. Fountains stood silent in courtyards of marble. Shaken by an age yet bound to grace, the air was perfumed by flowers that sang in colors no painter had conceived. No laboring smoke blackened the horizon. No clang of industry broke the hush of the gardens. These Eloi seemed to know no want, no danger. "And yet," he continued, "under that veneer of pastoral perfection lay a profound incapacity. The Eloi possessed neither curiosity nor fear. They gathered as children might around a bright bauble, applauding my machine as if it were a toy. They could not grasp its import, nor would they expend any thought upon its workings. Day after day they came and sat and laughed under the fountains, ignorant even of the decay in the ancient columns that shaded them." His voice grew darker. "Yet when I strove to learn their speech, they grew listless and wandered away. I found I could coax them to impart little more than names for fruit and flower and sky, no words of abstract inquiry, no terms for justice or time itself. Within a week their gaze bored me with its lack of depth, and I found myself yearning for a spark of intelligence even in the fallen ruins." He lifted one pale hand as though swatting off a phantom. Then night fell, and the air grew chill. I built a fire of fallen boughs and watched the stars slip out. Beneath the distant moonlight I heard a rustle in the undergrowth, and there, gaunt and pallid, came a procession of pale creature, half human, half animal, whose eyes shone with mechanical purpose. I dubbed them Morlocks, for they moved below the earth, emerging only after dusk to gather the Eloi as one gathers fruit. I barely escaped their clutches with my life. I fled through those silent groves, dragging a young Eloi maiden whom I called Winento, the riot of flame and smoke. I learned then that the underground labyrinths in which they dwelt were vast workshops where mechanical knowledge still smouldered, even as the surface world was rotting into peaceful uselessness. The time traveler rose, trembling, and paced the length of the room. "Gentlemen, you will understand that I could not remain in such a world. The Morlocks had stolen my Machinian act. I barely foiled and I fled into the night, haunted by their sullen cries. That night I lost Weena, and it was only by a desperate defense with my iron lever that I forced a path into the forest. He stopped, hand to brow. I tell you, my mind reeled with horror at the revelation that humanity had bifurcated one branch into childish feebleness, the other into cold subterranean servitude. Yet, beneath that horror, a deeper dread that this fate might await us all if our civilization continued in its present folly. Silence followed, broken by the ticking of a distant clock. The time traveler sank back into his chair, eyes glistening. That, I swear upon the mechanism of the machine itself, was but the first of my journeys. In the chapters to come you shall hear of my descent into the lair of the Morlocks, my rescue of Weena, and the terrible pursuit that followed me through night after night in that vanished world. Then, of further leaps, through ages of monstrous creatures and dying suns, until at last I found my way back to this very room. He drew a shuddering breath and sank silent. We rose in unison, each man moved by a sense of wonder and foreboding. The lamplight seemed suddenly too bright, too close for comfort. London's smoke and traffic lay somewhere beyond these walls, and here, in the hush of the old laboratory, we had glimpsed a future that might supplant all our hopes. Chapter 3. Descent into Darkness. The echo of the closing door faded behind me as I descended the narrow shaft that led into the bowels of the earth. Each metallic rung was slick beneath my fingers, and the walls dripped with an acrid moisture that clung to my clothing. Weena's small hand, pale and trembling, clutched mine. I felt her pulse flutter like a trapped bird. Below us lay a cavern of vast proportions, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor a twisting network of rails and machinery. A low hum like the incessant breathing of a giant vibrated through the air. My matches, nearly spent, burned by candlelight scarcely brighter than the phosphorescent glow from strange fungal mats that spread across the walls. The Morlocks it was they who had drawn mine, and Weena's path watched us from the gloom, their bulbous eyes reflecting the scant glimmer. They advanced with deliberate slowness, as though the very darkness empowered them, and their pale limbs slid past rusted pistons and corroded valves with a silence that betrayed ages of subterranean life. Each whispered breath of theirs carried the chill of oblivion. I raised my trembling hand and struck the final match. Its flare revealed a procession of white, chinless heads emerging behind us, arms reaching with mechanical precision. Horror rent my heart as I realized that this hidden world had become their dominion, and that we were intruders at whom they calculated with cold curiosity rather than fear. "We must climb," I gasped to Weena, hoisting her into the saddle of my barstool like the only handhold amidst the ruins. The Morlocks, confounded by the glare, retreated to a dozen shadowy corners, their forms flickering like spectres. Gathering resolve, I pressed my fist against a valve hatch above our heads. The mechanism resisted for a terrible instant, then yielded with a groan of shifting iron. Weena screamed and clung to my coat. Together we forced the hatch upward and hauled ourselves onto a narrow ledge of rock. Above lay another gallery of iron and steam, stained with dripping condensate. Beyond, a faint shaft of daylight lured us onward, like a promise of salvation. But before we might reach it, the Morlocks emerged anew, their ranks bolstered by fresh figures slinking down parallel galleries. I brandished my last sliver of camphor, set it ablaze in a fragment of paper, and the flare drove them back if only for a moment. We fled along the ledge, stumbling over riveted girders, heedless of the roar of unseen engines. At last, through a gap of stone, I glimpsed the fresh air of the surface. With an effort born of desperation, I grasped Weena in one arm and lunged upward through the aperture. The rocky sill bit into my palms, blood mingling with oil. For an instant I feared the Morlocks would drag us back, but the sunlight and the scream of wind granted us deliverance. We tumbled onto a slope of turf, blind and gasping. All about us, the world had shifted the screams below, growing faint yet here the air was warm, the grass soft beneath our feet. The entrance had closed behind us, the stone sealing once more over the darkness that held our pursuers. Weena collapsed, weeping, and I held her close, patting her back, murmuring promises I scarcely felt I believed. In that moment of reprieve, I resolved. I would rescue her people from that subterranean nightmare or perish in the attempt. Chapter 4. The Morlock's Domain. Dawn broke with a pale, uncertain light, filtering through ragged curtains of ivy and moss over the laboratory windows. I awoke to the soft clicking of Weena's restless breathing, curled at my side upon a pile of old blankets. The time machine stood silent across the room, the brass and quartz now dull with grime yet intact, proof that our narrow escape had not cost me the means of return. I rose, stiffened by the cramped slumber, and fetched a basin of water. As I splashed my face, I found the cut on my chin half healed, a testament to the savage blows exchanged in the Morlock's tunnel. My mind churned with questions. Whence did they draw their strength? What web of industry lay beneath that ruin of workshops? And most pressing, how regain the machines stolen by those pale artisans of darkness? Weena stirred, her sapphire eyes glimmering with childlike awe. I showed her the time machine. Her small hand reached out to touch the cool metal rail, and she repeated my name, Time Traveler, in her soft, lilting speech. For an instant, the warmth of her faith lent me courage. Breakfast was a meagre of fair-dried fruits and river water drawn by a back stair from the yard. The servants noted nothing unusual, though I wore the stains of adventure and the hollow look of a man aged by nights of fear. When the last dish had been cleared, I politely excused myself. I must inspect the laboratory, I said, voice steady, filing routine adjustments. Alone, I crossed to the hidden hatch concealed beneath a trapdoor in the floor. Beneath it lay the entry to the Morlock Tunnelson engineering feat of uncanny scale, whose iron-bound shaft stretched downward beyond sight. I felt in my pocket. A single matchstick remained my last slender hope. Descending again into that realm of lamented echoes, I kept Weena by my side, wrapped in my coat. The chill gloom enveloped us like a living thing. The rasping hiss of unseen engines filled the gloom. Every turn in the passage revealed further evidence of Morlock industry. Gantries etched with arcane control mechanisms, rusted cranes towering like skeletal giants, heaps of wire and carved stone that might once have been ornate facades. Yet no living Morlock appeared, only the faint hum of ventilation shafts above. I led Weena deeper, trusting her presence would dispatch some glimmer of humanity into that stifling darkness. At length we reached the great Hallan immense burial chamber of machines, its domed ceiling lost in gloom. At the center stood a dais of shattered marble, upon which rested the time machine, improbably preserved, gleaming amid the ruin. My heart leapt, but surrounding it were platforms occupied by dozens of Morlocks, their thin arms busy with extraction and refinement. They had not yet perceived our approach, intent as they were on the arcane work. I crept forward, clutching the single match, intent to break through their ranks by sudden flame. Weena gave a soft whimper. Her small fingers tightened. I whispered a promise and, stepping into the pale sheen of phosphorescence, struck the match. The conflagration that followed banished darkness in a tongue of fire. The Morlocks recoiled, shrieking in blind panic, their spindly forms twisting away. Seizing my chance, I sprinted to the dais, grasped the machine's lever and felt a dozen cold hands wrench at my coat. Weena's scream spurred me onward. I struck the lever with all my strength. In an instant the blaze sputtered out. The darkness swallowed all once more. A hush, interrupted by distant rattles in the machinery. Then, a single beam of light, the machine reappearing in a wash of dawn among my laboratory tools. I tumbled through the hatch, dragging Weena into the early light. The trap sealed. The Morlocks remained locked in their own domain, defeated by fire and will. Chapter 5. Flight Across Eons. The alleyway between laboratory and garden was narrow and shadowed, yet it beckoned like a path to renewal. Weena's small hand remained tight in mine, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and lingering fear. Since reclaiming the time machine from the Morlock domain, I had hardly paused to dress, but had sprung at once into the saddle and sent us hurtling into the future. My aim in that frantic moment was simple: to put an uncrossable gulf of centuries between myself and the subterranean fiends. We emerged on a hillside thick with flowering vines, their blossoms pale and drooping. Beyond us stretched a valley filled with crumbling spires of white marble, half swallowed by an overgrowth of silver ferns. A warm, lavender-scented breeze stirred through the ruins as the mechanism slowed to a gliding pause. Weena gazed about her, voice caught on a soft sigh. "Time traveler?" she asked, and placed her head upon my shoulder. I patted her back, heart hammering. "We must rest," I murmured, "for the next leap will take us far beyond the world we know." I killed the engine with a flick of the lever, and the machine stilled with a faint hiss. As I dismounted, I noticed a throng of Eloi approaching across the broken stone. Their faces were pale in the haze of sunset, hair loose upon their shoulders like river reeds, and their garments a patchwork of linen and vines. They came forward as one, curious, wordless, and unthreatening, yet insistent in their need for companionship. Among them was Weena's sister-bee, some instinct of recognition. She stretched forth both hands, and Weena ran into her embrace as into the arms of an elder child. In that moment, I understood how profoundly the Eloi had conformed to their idyllic world. Their memories were but patterns of sunlight and moonlight, their lives a sequence of day, dreams. "Stay, friend," one of them said, in the fractured tongue I had taught Weena. "You are welcome." His voice, sweet too sweet, lacked any undertone of caution. "Our valley is safe. The Morlocks come not here." He gestured toward a cluster of ruined archways, where flowering creepers dripped their petals onto ornate steps. Yet, I knew better than to trust that pastoral invitation. The Morlocks never ceased their ceaseless toil, their reach extended through every shaft and tunnel, and in some ages of the future they would return to claim not only their mechanical harvest, but all who trod the sunlit world. "Thank you," I replied, "but I must be gone." I lifted Weena into my arms and turned back to the machine. The Eloi bowed and smiled, a gesture of farewell devoid of sorrow. Behind me, the valley trembled with a distant groan and echo of engines deep underground. The vines quivered, and the flowers drained of color, as if the earth itself sensed the awakening of its unseen architects. I spared the Eloi one backward glance, a tableau of innocence upon a crumbling stage. Then I swung into the saddle, heart thundering, and pressed the lever. The world dissolved into the throb of time's passage. I saw continents rise and fall. First, a lush tropical plain, verdant and teeming with unimaginable creatures, giant serpents, winged lizards, herds of mammoth-sized beasts, whose bones lingered like the skeletons of ancient ships. Then, a sea of sand, red as the blood of stars, stretching to a horizon of shifting dunes that crested like waves in an ocean of burnished copper. I passed over mountain ranges of gleaming stone, their peaks rimmed with frozen air, and valleys clogged with rivers of tar that boiled beneath a sky of yellow haze. In the lingering dusk, cities of glass and steel rose like the teeth of some colossal beast monuments, to a civilization that had mastered the air and the atom, only to collapse into ruin when the sun itself began to fade. Throughout these leaps, Weena lay in my arms, her fragile body curled against my chest, unconscious of the storms of time that buffeted us. I dared not wake her, lest her gentle spirit be undone by the spectre of extinction upon extinction, of worlds born and worlds destroyed. At last, the landscape calmed. The oceans had vanished, leaving behind a cracked and brittle crust upon which strange crystalline growths shimmered in the sallow light. The sky was a vast dome of ochre, and the air tasted of rust and the dust of ages. Here and there, mounds of implement and wrecked scaffolding poked from the ground like the ribs of an enormous skeleton. I judged we had come 40 million years, hence an era beyond human memory. I set the machine down amid a field of glassy stones that caught the dying light in prismatic gleams. The lever lay ready beneath my hand, yet I hesitated. Beyond that field lay a silence so absolute it pressed upon the soul. I had seen life in its myriad forms, in the lupine forests of the Carboniferous, in the reptilian realms of the Mesozoic, in the golden cities of the Eloi, and the subterranean workshops of the Morlocks. Yet here was nothing but the hush of oblivion. I laid Weena gently upon a cushion of velvet moss and stepped back, hand upon the lever. Before me flickered the last sunset of the earth, the dim boss of the sun marking its final crest upon a horizon of smoked steel. I took a deep breath, sweat beading on my brow despite the chill of that haggard age. In that tremulous moment, I saw her, a lone shape rising from the mound of scattered mechanisms, the limp form of an enormous crab, long dead, its skeleton encrusted with the salt of vanished seas. I caught the echo of some vast creature's call. Was it whined upon broken bones, or the lament of worlds departing? Then a voice rose within me, plea from the heart of time itself. Return, forego the final edge of nothingness, the absolute sunset of all things, and come home. My fingers tightened on the lever. Weena's eyelids fluttered. She murmured in her distant tongue and reached for me. I sprang back, swung into the saddle, and pulled forward with all my might. The world blurred into light and shadow. Mountains tore themselves from the plains and dissolved into rivers. Oceans surged around continents only to vanish beneath desert winds. And at last, I sensed the hush of the laboratory, the touch of familiar dust upon the machine's rail. When I opened my eyes, the time traveler's workshop lay about me in the lamplit calm of late afternoon. Weena slept in a coil of blankets at my feather, pale fingers curled. The time machine sat poised upon the bench, as though waiting for another voyage. The men had gathered. Philby peered at me with eager incredulity. The psychologist's lips quivered with emotion. The medical man's hand rested upon my shoulder. At that sight, tears threatened my eyes. By Providence, Philby whispered, you've done it again. And there, in the hush of that old London room, Weena stirred, blinked at the gas jets above, and smiled. I lifted her into my arms and felt her warmth, proof that, in the heart of endless time, compassion endures. Chapter 6. A World Beneath Dying Suns. The machine leapt forward through time, and with it Irodomy hands clenched upon the controls, my thoughts numbed by wonder and dread. The laboratory blurred into shadow, and then into absence. Light itself became a strobe of time's passage. I beheld the sun arc like a pendulum, rising and falling with terrifying speed as the days and nights coiled upon each other like whipcords. Centuries fled beneath me. Forests grew and vanished. Seas crept inland and withdrew. Mountains eroded and reformed like waves of stone. The outlines of cities gleaming, and monstrous merged and then dissolved into ruin. The earth itself reshaped, as though under the hand of some vast sculptor. When I at last slowed, I found myself upon the edge of a blackened sea. The sun, no longer goldeno, burned a dull, deep red. Its heat was waning, its size diminished. I stepped from the time machine and found the air bitter and thin. My breath rose in vapor, even though no wind stirred. The sea, sluggish and dark, pulsed against a jagged shore of basalt. I wandered. No birds sang, no insects hummed. The silence was so complete, it pressed upon the skull like a vice. And then, rising in the east, I saw them. Great crabs, sluggish and immense, crawling across the wet stone. Their armored backs shone with a nacreous sheen, and their eyes cold, expressionless, watched me without curiosity. I moved away quickly, heart pounding. One followed, slow but relentless. The machine stood 100 paces behind me, and with an effort I dashed for it, mounted, and wrenched the lever forward. Further still I fled, into stranger ages. Each time I paused, the world was less recognizable. At one point, the sky was shrouded in a milky fog, and the sun a mere ember overhead. Black lichens crept across the ground, and no animals moved. In another era, the land was submerged in a shallow sea, and vast jelly-like shapes drifted beneath its waves. And then I reached the end. The machine slowed. I found myself upon a vast plain of ice and stone, beneath a sky of eternal twilight. The sun hung low, unmoving, casting long shadows from great crystalline structures that jutted from the frost. The moon was gone. The stars were faint. Only the soft hush of wind across the ice broke the silence. Nothing lived. I stood alone. The last Manif man I still wast, look upon the corpse of earth. Even time itself seemed brittle here, as though a single breath might shatter it. I wept. Then I returned. Backward I flew through the eras. Mountains reversed their erosion. Forests reassembled leaf by leaf. Cities reformed. Humanity returned indistinct at first, then sharp and multitudinous. At last, the familiar outline of my laboratory coalesced around me, and with a shudder, the time machine came to rest. I was home, and yet no longer the same. The knowledge I carried was too vast, too terrible. The golden age of the alloy, the mechanical horror of the Morlocks, the slow extinguishing of all life under dying sunset haunted every breath. Chapter 7. The Return and the Question. The time traveler leaned back in his chair, the firelight flickering across his pallid features. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked on steadily, and the shadows deepened across the walls. Outside, the London fog rolled against the windows, indifferent to the marvels recounted within. At last, the medical man stirred. "And so," he said, clearing his throat, "you returned. After all that you returned." The time traveler nodded. "I returned, yes. But I fear it is only my body that remains here, while part of me, perhaps the truest part, remains lost in those eras beyond reckoning. In every age I visited, I carried the burden of our present, and now I carry their burdens too." Philby's voice broke in, louder than intended. "But surely, man, some part of this is imagined, some trick of exhaustion or dream. You don't expect us to accept crabs the size of carriages and jelly, fish skies as fact." The time traveler rose slowly and crossed to the table where he had placed his relics. He picked up a strange, half-fossilized seed pod and turned it in the lamplight. "This grew in a world without bees or birds. I found it beside a tower of black ice, where no wind stirred and no sound lived. You may doubt my mind, Philby, but not the thing my hands have brought back." He placed the pod beside the pale blossoms from Wiener's time. They shimmered still, delicate and unearthly. "I believe you," said the psychologist softly, "not only because of these," he gestured to the items, "but because of the clarity of your recollection. You speak as a man who has lived these things, not as one who dreams." The time traveler smiled faintly. "I thank you. And yet, I do not ask for belief, only that you consider the consequences. If what I saw is truly the destiny of mankind splintered into idle surface dwellers and blind mechanical hunters, then what is our duty now, while change is still ours to command?" A silence followed, deeper than before. The flicker of the lamp seemed to cast shadows longer than the walls. Blank, who had said little all evening, spoke next. "But surely if that is a possible future, it is not the only one. What if some other branch of humanity endures elsewhere? What if our efforts now may yet shape what comes?" "Indeed," said the time traveler. "That is the hope. That is why I have told you this." He turned toward the hearth. "That is why I must go again." The medical man blinked. "You mean you intend to return to that horror?" "Not return," the time traveler said. "Explore. I have seen the far end, but not all the paths in between. I must know more. Perhaps there are ages where balance was struck. Perhaps Wiener's people once knew strength. Perhaps the Morlocks were not always beasts." He moved to the door and opened it. "I leave at dawn. This time I go prepared supplies, protection, charts. I have outfitted the machine anew, but I do not know when, or if, I shall return." He looked back at us. "I trust you to preserve this account. If I fail, let this story stand as both record and warning." We stood as he left the room, the door shut gently behind him. None of us slept well that night. The next morning, I returned early to the house. The air was crisp, a silver mist veiling the rooftops. The butler led me to the laboratory without a word. The time machine was gone. No trace of him remained but the marks in the dust where the machine had stood, and a small leather-bound journal resting on the workbench. I opened it with trembling hands. Within were diagrams, sketches, notes, calculations of acceleration through temporal curvature, estimates of planetary shift, and small notations such as "Sun now Rubisky, cloud'll sair thin." His hand grew shakier in the last pages, as if written in haste or under strain. Then it ended. No farewell, no certainty, just silence. The following weeks passed in a haze. I tried to speak of it to other scientific men, philosophers, even theologians, but found myself unable to convey the magnitude of what he had shown us. They looked at me with polite dismissal, or else cautious concern. The others from that night avoided the topic. Philby left for a post abroad. The medical man resumed his practice. The psychologist turned inward, his once precise thinking now tinged with speculation. As for me, I remain, and I write. I write this as a testament not merely of what he claimed to see, but of the vision that shaped his final journey, that we may influence our destiny not only through invention, but through empathy, vigilance, and restraint. His machine may still move forward, through the ice and silence, and perhaps one day it shall return. Chapter 8. The Branching Ages. In the days that followed the time traveler's final departure, I found myself drawn obsessively to the idea of his journey, not merely as a tale of spectacle, but as a puzzle of fate and possibility. His journal haunted my sleep, his voice echoed behind each turn of the page. Yet the world moved on, indifferent, until the morning the machine returned. It came not with thunder or flame, but with a whisper of displaced air. I found it there standing motionless in the center of the laboratory, as though it had never left. The mechanisms bore fresh marks, strange crystalline growths around the levers, faint etchings across the brass like runes scratched by a machine's dream. And beside it, collapsed across the floor, was a bundle of cloth and bone that had once been a man. It was not the time traveler. The body was smaller, stooped. The garments it wore were woven from fibers I could not identify, soft as silk, and yet impervious to blade or flame. Its skin was pale as milk, eyes sealed shut beneath lids too smooth for any human race I had ever known, and in its hand tightly clutched was a second journal. I shall not attempt to describe the awe that gripped me as I opened it. The script was his changed, yes, by wear or mutation, but his. And as I read, the fragments formed the beginning of a new chapter. I set out not to return but to understand. Not one future, but many. The machine does not follow a line, but navigates a field. Every choice, every delay, every decision of fear or courage casts shadows in the fourth dimension. I have found not one future, but thousands, and I must map them, even if it costs me the shape of my mind or the frame of my flesh. He spoke of divergent ages, one where mankind conquered entropy through symbiosis with machines, one where Earth had been abandoned, but our echoes lived on in orbiting minds, one where no Morlocks had ever emerged, because industry had been shared equally between minds and hands. He had seen worlds of light, where learning passed from brain to brain like flame along oil. He had seen nightmares too, ice ages that returned not through nature, but war. Stars kindled into death by weaponized physics. In one such branch, he wrote, "I walk through a city where every thought was monitored, every action predicted. Man had mastered chaos and forgotten freedom. They called it perfection. I fled. And yet in another, I found we are not the same, but another, a descendant, an echo. She knew my name, though I had never spoken it. Her people lived among glass towers and rivers of light. They remembered a tale of a man who came from the past. I dared not stay. He wandered between timelines like a thread passing through cloth, weaving and unweaving reality. He marked the moments where decisions could change entire civilizations, what he called points of divergence. In the margins he drew symbols, hourglasses, spirals, branching trees. At last, in the final pages, my body begins to fail. I have seen more centuries than flesh can endure. I am changed. My hands are not as they were. My thoughts at times they loop. But I have left the machine. Others may ride it now. Let them see, choose, and remember. I go, forward. There were no more words. I sat in the laboratory for hours beside that silent engine, its crystalline gears gleaming like eyes that had seen too much. I dared not touch it. That night, I buried the strange traveler beneath the great oak behind the house, placing both journals in a sealed case within the vault. The stars above seemed closer than before, or perhaps I only wished they were. Some days, I believe he still travels. Other days, I wonder if he ever truly left. Chapter 9. Through the Memory of Light. Journal entry. Undated. Time no longer flows it pools. Here, in the twilight of Earth's third renaissance, moments exist like droplets of amber, each containing a complete consciousness. I have arrived in an age where history is not written but remembered encoded in living minds, and passed from generation to generation like heirlooms carved from thought. I no longer ask how far I have come. The sky above me is no longer blue, nor red, nor even black. It is translucent, like the membrane of a sleeping eye. The sun has waned into a soft sphere that pulses rather than burns. There is no night, only the dimming and brightening of the planetary breath. The time traveler stood upon a vast plateau of synthetic stone, a material neither cold nor warm, that hummed faintly beneath his feet. Towers curved inward like petals toward a central sphere of living light. The archive, as he would later call it. There were no doors. The structures seemed to grow from the earth, as if shaped not by machines, but by intention alone. He had left the machine at the base of a shallow ridge. It no longer obeyed him as it once had. The crystalline formations on the control levers had grown denser, more resistant, as though the device itself resisted further strain. For the first time since his voyage began, he had descended into a world where the machine felt outdated. The inhabitants approached not on foot, but as flickers of motion. They were neither Eloi nor Morlock, nor any descendant of his known lineages. They called themselves the Rememberers, not a people, but a network of sentient memory threads that had, over aeons, reconstituted human experience into new forms. Their bodies were fluid, lightly shimmering vessels that adapted to gravity and temperature as easily as thought. They spoke not in words, but by stimulating images directly into the traveler's cortex. He understood them, not because they spoke English, but because they knew what it was like to be human. Journal entry. They remember my arrival before I make it. The timeline here is circular in concept, not linear. Their historians are not chroniclers of the past, but engineers of the moment, weaving memory into action. They tell me, "You have been here before, and yet, this is your first time." I replied, "Then, how can I change anything?" They smiled not with faces, but through radiant warmth hand answered, "You already did." The time traveler was led into the archive. He passed through fields of data, suspended in lighter library of lived experience. Each chamber preserved not books or discs, but the essence of moments. A parent watching their child learn to walk, a philosopher witnessing the last eclipse of the sun, a soldier disarming a weapon not with force, but forgiveness. He lingered before a sequence encoded in blue radiance. It was Weena, not the same Weena, but an echo, a reconstruction of her memory, preserved through 1,000 descendants who had passed down her story. She had become more than a girl, she had become a myth. And through this archive, the time traveler saw what he had become as well. Some called him the first divergence, others, the one who questioned. A few, in the higher layers of memory, had renamed him simply Origin. Journal entry. I find myself weeping again. Not out of sorrow, nor joy, but because there is no longer a clear distinction between the two. The rememberers offered me sanctuary not as a guest, but as a preserved moment. I could allow them to extract my life as one final memory and store it forever in the archive. But if I allow myself to become a moment, am I still a man? He refused, at least for now. Outside, the air had grown still. The planet no longer turned. It rotated only slightly, balanced by gravitational structures, constructed long after tectonic motion had ceased. The stars no longer wheeled above, they held their place like eyes staring back through time. And the machine, that stubborn relic of brass and quartz, still waited for him. Its saddle cracked, its rods faintly humming, its levers no longer sharp, but dulled by use. He mounted it, feeling his bones groan in protest. Final entry of Chapter 9. I leave this place not because I wish to forget, but because I now remember too much. Memory is not a destination. It is a weight. And I must keep moving, for what lies beyond memory may be the truth. Chapter 10. The Edge of Knowing. Journal entry. Fragmented. I have moved beyond language. What I write now is a reconstruction shadows thrown on the cave wall of cognition. I no longer travel through time. I travel with it, like a drop swept along a tide that bends back upon itself. The machine no longer responded to coarse manipulation. The crystalline growths around the levers had fused into intricate shapes, refracting light in ways my eyes could not wholly decipher. I touched one curve and saw an entire century unfold a civilization that rose on tides of song, where sound-shaped stone and laws were sung rather than written. I touched another, and felt the pull of gravity reverse in my spine, as if the machine now rode the curvature of meaning, not matter. There was no sky. I floated in a field of shifting vectors, colors without name, dimensions without axis. My body, if it still existed, was a vessel of thought. The only anchor was the journal, or what it had become, a matrix of memory coded in sensation and thought. At some point, though, I used the word loosely. I arrived. It was not a place, but an interface. A presence greeted me. You have reached the terminus of interpretability, it said, not in sound, but in resolution, like a thought refined to its final clarity. All that Aisha's already branched, all that could be was. I struggled to comprehend the being. It was not a deity, nor intelligence in any form I could recognize. It had no shape. It was shape. It was structure, the template upon which possible timelines refracted like light through a prism. I asked, what lies beyond? Journal entry. Fragmented and reconstructed. There comes a point beyond which language, thought, and even time itself begin to fold inward. Here, I have passed it. The terms I once used past, future, forward, return no longer apply. I now exist not in time, but in relation to its dissolution. I call this place the edge of knowing, and beyond it, I fear even metaphor may falter. I do not remember the leap. Whether I rode the machine into this realm or simply slipped into it through wear of mind and momentum of purpose, I cannot say. The boundary was not marked by motion or light, but by the cessation of context. One moment I was somewhere, the next, I was in the absence of all place yet, not in void, not death, not dream. Rather, it felt as if the sum of every question I had ever asked had converged upon me pressing inward not to destroy, but to define. The machine, too, had changed. Its brass limbs were now limned with fine latticeworks of crystal and vapor. Where once rods and rivets groaned with physical torque, now arcs of refracted geometry floated like bones of light. The levers had transmuted, grown too intricate for touch, now responding not to force, but to will. I could no longer tell whether I sat in the machine, as the machine, or whether I was being carried by some residual mechanism of memory itself, for I no longer moved forward. Time had ceased to be linear. I floated resonated within an expanding and collapsing sphere of causality. I perceived structures around me, but they were not made of matter. Shapes drifted bispheres within loops within spirals. Some were simple, others impossibly ornate, polyhedra whose faces bore cities, universes, intentions. Some of these shapes moved, others watched, and one turned toward me. Communication, register read non-verbal, interconceptual, entity designation, origin, temporal signature, divergent, prime. The voice of Presense did not emerge from air or sound, but arrived directly into the architecture of my thought. Its arrival brought not noise but order, the sudden arrangement of uncertainty into pattern. It was as if I had heard music before, and now perceived the score written in logic and light. You are the summation of inquiry, it said. You are recursion made flesh. You approach the terminus. I seek to understand, I answered, though I did not move my lips. I have seen centuries, worlds, ends, origins, but I have not yet seen the source. Because you are the source. This notion staggered me. I am no architect. I am no god. I am a man. You were a man, but a question pursued to its furthest extent becomes indistinguishable from a force. I hesitated. If this is the end, why show me? Why now? Because you are still asking. At that, I understood something vital. The asking itself is the engine. The time machine was never merely a device of gears and quartz. It was an expression of curiosity, distilled into action. I had made it with my hands, but it had continued far beyond them. It had become a thought experiment made literal, and now that experiment had arrived at its final proposition. I stood, if standing means anything here. Around me spun echoes of my journey, the forest of the Eloi, the metal hives of the Morlocks, the frozen beaches of twilight earth, the archive of the rememberers. Each memory refracted into infinite permutations. In one, I had died in the forest fire with Weena. In another, I had never returned to the machine. In yet another, I had never built it at all. And in one, I had never been born. Each was real. Each was observed. The edge of knowing was not a place, but a convergence, the intersection of all roads walked and unwalked. The presence asked, you may return, you may dissolve, you may remain. But to step forward is to become no longer a questioner, but the question itself. I faltered. There is a terror, deeper than death, that dwells in the notion of completion. To finish the journey is to remove all doubt. And without doubt, what are we? Yet I knew, as all travelers must, that stillness is not our destiny. Journal entry, visual reconstruction. I chose to step forward. It was not motion. It was transcendence. I passed through the final threshold, a membrane not of space but of abstraction. I entered a realm where my consciousness unfurled like a sail. I could see, dimly, everything. I saw time not as a line or a spiral, but as a chord vibrating with harmonics of every decision, every birth, every extinction. I saw entropy as an agreement, not a rule, light as a residue of perception, death as an editing choice. I saw the heat death of the universe not as an end, but as a page turn. And then I saw nothing. And then I saw myself, not as a body, not even as a mind, but as a question still unfolding. Final journal transmission. I am not lost. I am distributed. I am the memory of inquiry, echoing through minds yet unborn. I am the curve in a diagram, the pause in a sentence, the hand that reaches for the lever. There is no return in the ordinary sense. But I know someone will ask again, and when they do, the machine will be waiting, just as it was for me, just as it will before you. Beyond, there is only inversion. of time, of identity, of inquiry. To step forward from here is to become the thing you have been seeking. Then what have I been seeking? You. Journal entry. Final segment. Handwritten. I stood at the edge of total abstraction. Time was no longer a road, or even a sea, it was a mirror, and it showed me not my past or future, but the moment I first asked why. That question has never left me. It has taken the shape of stars, of machines, of voices, and here, at the edge of knowing, I must choose. To return, or to become. I chose neither. Or perhaps I chose both. The journal ends there, its final pages scorched at the edge as though burned from within. The machine has not returned. But sometimes, in quiet hours beneath the oak tree where I buried that other traveller, I hear the wind ripple in ways that do not match the air. Not backwards, not forwards, but sideways, like a question searching for someone new to ask it. Chapter 11. The silence beyond the machine. The machine has not returned. Not in months. Not in years. Not in the slow turn of seasons that has dulled the brass on the lab's great window latch, or gathered dust like frost upon the coal-black mantelpiece. The fire in that drawing room has long since cooled, the chairs pulled back from the hearth as if the guests who once debated here had risen mid-conversation and simply never returned. I am the only one who still visits. The others, Philby, the medical man, even the psychologist, have gone their ways, dispersed into the tides of rationality and career. Philby, with his irritable scoff, had muttered something about mental breakdowns and magnetism-induced hallucinations. The medical man grew quiet in the weeks following our final meeting, and the psychologist withdrew into books and measurements, searching for some chemical explanation he could never quite name aloud. But I remained. I remained because of the silence. It was not merely the absence of the traveller himself that haunted the room, but something deeper, a pause, heavy and deliberate, that had been laid upon the world since his last departure, the kind of silence that fills a chapel after prayer, the kind that follows a question asked with such sincerity that no answer can do it justice. He had left behind only fragments, a journal half written, its later entries grown abstract and near impossible to pass. The remains of the first model, an impression scorched into the floorboards, faintly glowing under certain angles of morning light. And a grave, behind the house, where another traveller altered, unrecognizable, but unmistakably kin to him, in purpose now rested. But no return, only echoes. I have read and reread his notes. The ones he composed before he vanished into whatever lay beyond the furthest edge of time. And I cannot help but believe him. He spoke not merely of the future, but of futures plural, branching, contradicting, resolving, and reopening. He described humanity's dreams and humanity's ruins. And in the quietest, most fragile entries, he wrote of a place where time ceases to be linear, where memory becomes the world itself, and where the self is dissolved into its own inquiry. He had travelled past survival, past progress, past even death. He had gone to seek the final shape of a question. And though I remained behind, I know with every fibre of my own restless mind that the machine did not fail him. It did exactly what it was always meant to do. It led him beyond understanding. I have seen others come to the house, historians, scientists. Once, a child who claimed to be a distant relative. They examine the machine with awe, but never touch it. Something holds them back, a reverence, perhaps, or a fear, as though they know deep down that pulling the lever may do more than bend time. It may change them. I have never tried. I do not know whether that is cowardice or wisdom. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I did. Would I meet him again, my friend, the time traveller on some distant shore of the universe, where thought and matter converge? Would I walk through a forest of memory, or a city shaped from sound? Or would I arrive in that place he described last where all things end, and all questions return to silence? Would I come back? Tonight, the air is colder than usual. The wind presses against the shutters in slow, uncertain gusts. I sit in his chair, the same one he rose from the night he first vanished before our eyes. The fire is low. The house does not creak as it once did. The machine rests beneath its velvet sheet, though sometimes I think I see the cover stir not from motion, but from presence. And above, in the sky beyond the oak tree, I see a single star that seems to pulse faintly, slowly as though blinking. Perhaps it is only my imagination, or perhaps it is something else. Perhaps he is still out there, traveling not through time, but through the act of remembering, living on in every moment where someone, somewhere, dares to ask, what if? What lies ahead? What does it mean to begin? The machine waits. And perhaps one day, when another mind dares to wander far enough, when another hand trembles on the lever, the silence will break once more, and the chronicle will continue.